you're not going to get replaced by AI. You're going to get replaced by somebody who's using it. Imagine a bookkeeper that decided, nah, I'm not going to use a spreadsheet. I'm not going to use these programs. I like my pencils. What does automation mean? I mean, it's not a bad word, automation. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're always trying to build software that automates manual, repetitive, time-consuming, error-prone, so we as humans can focus on the things that we either are better at doing or want to be doing.
Focused on a vision for AI, Seth Hallen's journey of over 25 years in media and entertainment technology has been driven by a passion for storytelling. He is the member of the Television Academy and the past president of the Hollywood Professional Association.
I do think that the traditional distribution still has a meaningful role. This doesn't displace this about to explode next generation of independent filmmakers and storytellers is going to be unlocked and unleashed with some of these advanced technologies.
This conversation will give you insights into the future of Hollywood and the creator economy, and then inspire you with new ideas to be a founder in the media industry. Welcome, Seth.
Welcome, Seth.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Welcome.
Now, we left out one important fact there with those years. Many of those years have been with Art and I, who have known you for many, many years. I haven't actually added it up now, but for most of the time that we've been in the industry, so we could say close to that 20-year mark. And we've seen you play across these fields and these areas, and obviously have seen your love for tech. And then now in this new chapter, you're leaning even more heavily into it, while some people are getting a little bit worried. And I'd love to hear from you right now. When you look at Hollywood, I can't say on fire because there were just fires, and that does sound a little messed up. But literally, the studio itself, the system as we know it, the industry, there's a lot of struggles. And can you just kind of bring us up to what these various struggles are that have led us to where we are right now in the industry today?
Sure. And thanks, Michael and Art. And isn't that kind of cool, by the way, that we kind of grew up together for the last 20 years in this business?
Yeah,
and,
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. In the sense that you guys were actually on the client side for me. So I was a service provider to you, which
we were paying. We know it. No,
yeah. No, not at all. Not at all. We're still friends. So that means something.
Yeah.
But that is great. And I love this conversation, and it's so nice to have that kind of history, to have this chemistry with you guys on this discussion. So with Hollywood, I mean, I think, it's got complicated details all around the edges, but the root cause for me is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. The economics of creating, distributing, and monetizing content, especially high quality scripted narrative, long form content, or movies and TV shows, episodics, have been fundamentally disrupted, and these massive shifts in the way, again, content is monetized and the consumption habits of the consumers have just changed so much. So, in a big picture, if you look at how much, for example, consumption is done on YouTube, and you look at how much is done on other social platforms like TikTok, that used to be consumption that would go to traditional Hollywood linear television or movies. And now it's being consumed on platforms that are outside the traditional Hollywood structure. And that doesn't just mean consumption time. It also means lots of money. So one fun fact is, I think, and somebody might, correct my exact details here, but YouTube's advertising revenues alone, so not subscriptions and everything else, but just what they get from advertisers, was something like $35 or $38 billion last year. And that is about the same as all of Netflix's revenues, as an example. So, those tens of billions of dollars used to go to the linear television commercial advertising line item, and now it's going outside. So when you add that all up, the consumption and the money, it's a massive shift of all of that, and that's why it shouldn't be a surprise why something like up to half of the number of productions, new starts and productions are happening right now than did 2 years ago. I think they've gotten a little bit better, but it's still a pretty significant percentage.
Yeah, I was just reading yesterday too. What is it? There's a new studio looking to go build in Vegas now. People are like, "Why aren't you keeping this in, L.A.?" And at the same time, I also think there's a lot of people who are like, "Gosh, at least I can afford a home up there," and it's still L.A.-ish, with the distance and such. But would you say that are there still these productions happening around the world, but maybe just not in LA, or has the face of production changed because people are producing for things like YouTube now?
If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to click on the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell. It lets YouTube know you want to support the This Is the Way podcast, and it helps spread the word, and we greatly appreciate it. And now, back to the episode.
So let me answer that in a few ways. First of all, when we think about content, if we also include all of the content creators on all these other platforms, and we think about the revenues and we think about the amount of money being made, there's actually more content and more money than ever before if you add it all together. That's the interesting thing that we need to look at as an industry, as Hollywood. We need to acknowledge that and relate to that, and in some way. And I think there's a strong message happening with a lot of my colleagues that are looking at this, where we do need to lean into that and understand how to sort of tap into that, how to enable that. There's been this kind of feeling, and you guys, I'd love to hear your view also, by the way. I know you're asking me the questions, but isn't there like this thing kind of traditionally where we don't pay much attention, we don't have much respect for sort of the creator that's out there that's creating on YouTube, and that there's this division or this wall, this Hollywood wall that's up, where it makes it really difficult. I mean, let's face it, even if you are a YouTube creator, for you to make money on a YouTube channel, really difficult. It's top of the pyramid kind of stuff. But it's also true for professional filmmakers that are more Hollywood based. It's top of the pyramid too, to get a deal with any studio or any streamer. It's really difficult. So what, how do where's the opportunity there? What's the real problem there? And I think it's a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah, as parents with young children now too, we see that shift, meaning our kids are watching YouTube. And honestly, I found myself recently with certain shows. There's one, Jordan Matter, and a few other ones where, and maybe it helps in that case that there's the middle-aged dad and the daughter, but it's like we find ourselves, my wife and I both, like get caught up in these things. We're like, these actual really simple, basically, follow them around with the camera style is keeping our interest, and they're creating these shows that can run, like they would have been sitcoms, back in the day, 30-minute, 22-minute, whatever you want to say. And they're winning. But the difference is, I'm sure some of their setups are better, but these days people can take this and create. Whereas in the past, I remember Art and I film school. It's like we were right on the edge where film cameras were moving to digital. So you had to go and figure out how you were going to rent a film camera, package, because you weren't going to buy one. And then you had to figure out from there. It's like then the transition to digital. Art and bought a digital camera, and then but there's still the light. There's still all that. It's like there were still all these things that made it a little bit harder. Today, again, it's so easy to be able to do, and YouTube and others give you distribution. So while I completely agree, it's like it's hard to build up and get that audience, but at the same time, it's like it can also unlock something right away. I remember Art and I worked with individual at Disney for a while, Dave Hollis and his wife Rachel Hollis, who's now got this little media empire of her own. She blew up because of something she posted on social media, and it drew all this attention, and then boom, there you are. So it's like, I think while it could be difficult, there is also these, I don't want to call them overnight moments because it's dangerous. She was doing lots of work still aside from that, but it's those things that can unlock it. Art and I are waiting for that for our podcast moments too, by the way.
My kids, 6 and 4, they're primarily on Netflix. And I say that because I think Netflix did a smart thing where, to try to get some kids content on the platform, they started licensing the YouTube content.
Or buying
So
some of those
then,
companies actually too.
yeah. So as a parent, it's safer for us to just have them on Netflix because it's not going to suggest something random that maybe we don't want them to watch. So my kids are on Netflix all the time, but watching the same content they used to watch on YouTube, which, I don't know how common this is, but I always thought, wow, what a brilliant strategy. Whoever came up with this at Netflix paid them the big bucks.
Well, and actually, one thing I have to say on that was also really interesting is when I was at Netflix. While, by the way, I went over there when a lot of folks at Disney and others were still saying, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Netflix doesn't have a viable business model." And now they literally are I don't want to say the only one, but they are the successful streamer who does regularly make a profit, whereas the other ones are still like, "Are we going to?" And Netflix said, we don't see necessarily just like a Disney or apparently any of those as the competitors. Our competitors YouTube, and they acknowledge that, which I think has been good when they've thought about programming based on that.
Isn't that interesting? And here's a couple other things to look at with Netflix, which I find extraordinary. To your point, when Netflix started doing original programming, nobody really took it seriously at the beginning, and whether or not you liked some of those original shows like Lilyhammer, I think it was, or something else.
Right.
House of Cards.
But we didn't pay much attention until they started winning Emmys and Oscars, and then Amazon did the same thing, and it was like, oh gosh, now it took them a long time to get profitable. I think if you look at the numbers,
Oh, it did. Yeah, they were playing that game. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Netflix finally started getting profitable just a few years ago, but they dialed it in. And then fast forward to 2019 when Disney Plus launched and Apple TV launched, and I think Peacock launched the same year, and CBS Plus maybe a little bit before that, which later became Paramount Plus.
You
But
just add a plus, yeah.
all of this activity sort of happened around the 2019 area because it took that long to kind of, for the traditional studios to kind of, figure out what they want to do and what their strategies were and go through that process. But
yeah,
think about how long a pure play streamer like Netflix that made almost from the beginning really good content, as good as any Hollywood content, award-winning content.
People would say TV. People would argue TV side features. They would, not always as good. But yeah.
Well, I mean, Roma, was a feature that they did put in the theaters to be eligible for Oscars. But I mean, they've made good
totally with you.
Feature, yeah. And anyway, and I guess the point is, if you think about how long it took a pure play streamer like Netflix that was making award-winning content, how long it took them to get profitable. Imagine if you're a traditional studio where for 100 years you were built on an ROI per project model, trying to shift to something that's ROI on a streaming platform model, which is fundamentally completely different. Where if you think of a studio, every department, every person, the way they do their books, the way they interact with their shareholders, everything is around ROI per project. And to think that overnight they could shift to this completely different, fundamentally different model and be profitable, and they haven't been. So I think finally Disney and some of the others are profitable on a quarter-to-quarter basis, but still climbing out of big holes. That is my point in saying this. I think it's going to stabilize, but this is partly why the strike. This is why, by the way, the strikes happened. AI exacerbated it, but the strikes were because of streaming residuals. So when you have a situation where actors and writers want more money for streaming residuals, but the studios literally are losing money, that's going to only go in one place, right? To a strike.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to call that out, that it takes time for these things, and the disruption's real, and that's what we're going through right now.
Right. No, it's a great point, and it's also interesting, because I was just reading something too yesterday about how I think it's the new is it the Warner plus Disney plus Hulu package, whatever it is. Like there's this one now that's performing really well. People are like, that's the sweet spot. There's all the content that I, wanted, because that's also been what's hard, is people having to kind of cherry pick and try to figure it out. And I think with Netflix, it's become a little bit of, I don't want to call it the utility, but it's like there's so much content that comes out on there that people can justify.
Has that launched yet, the Warner Disney thing? Because I heard about it, but
something happened price wise, because what I just read is that they were, the performance on it was really high, like the demand and stuff like that around that. So, but I should speak more of it before I look at it. Yeah,
I would do it. in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Because it starts to be like, okay, cool. These ones here, and if the price is then right for it, but it is ironic how we all moved away from cable only to come back to something that starts to look a little bit like
But
cable or more.
you know what's needed, and I can't wait for it. And in fact, I'm looking for. There are a few founders working on this that I'm talking to at the
What's
moment.
that?
So when you think about how fragmented your experience is as a consumer, and I think the three of us are also great consumers of this content, right? We have all of the streaming platforms. I use Apple TV personally on every TV, and but sometimes I'm like, all right, great, I got 2 hours to watch a movie because after that I'm gonna fall asleep.
Yeah.
But I spend 45 minutes of it figuring out what the heck I want to
Oh
watch.
my
It
gosh.
should
Yeah, it's
not
ridiculous.
be that hard.
No.
And the thing is we have the capabilities to pull that together, and then imagine a world where you have AI that is really applying algorithms that are already in place to really identify what you might like. But how about the next generation of that is detecting your mood? It can, because you're talking to it. It can see your facial expressions. It can hear your voice, and it can tell: do you want a comedy? Do you want a drama? Action movie? It can really, with sentiment analysis, tune into what you want. That's next, and I can't wait for that. So.
Yeah, I love it because I definitely did. Well, the question is, will it still stop me from that, whatever internal need is? Maybe it's a dopamine hit to be like, what's on this streamer? What's on this streamer? What's on this streamer? But I think what you said, definitely that need for it. Even yesterday, I'm like, I just finished watching the series Vikings, and I'm like, okay, where are similar things? And looking across the platforms, you got to search online, so it would definitely be easier for something like that. I thought Apple TV would solve that a little bit because they do aggregate stuff, but it doesn't really still because they still have their stuff they're selling. I love that. I'll be looking forward to that. On that note,
I have my own workflow. I use Apple TV to search. Then I jump into Prime to get better information on whatever it is, and then I decide where do I go to watch it. So it's like a 3-step process that I have to go through.
That's hilarious. That's funny. Well, I'm curious, Seth, as you mentioned that as an example, where else do you see a lot of the disruption happening right now with AI? And when I say disruption, I should say, where do you just see AI fitting into the future of I'll go a little broader, media industry at large, because obviously, I don't know, I struggle as some of these things, just as we said with YouTube and others, like traditional media starts falling into the new medias, and then what is new media now? Maybe new media is a traditional media. So just going a little bit broad, what would you say are some of the biggest opportunities? Let's start there with AI right now.
I love the question. First thing is the only disruption that AI has caused is fear. And I'm going to go on the record, and we're being recorded right now, to say not one job has been lost because of AI in our industry.
Interesting.
And I'm waiting for somebody to prove me wrong or call it out, but no one has yet. So I'm going to continue to say that until somebody.
Let me ask a quick question on that then. Would you say that, and I may already know the answer, but Technicolor recently mentioned their struggles. Now they're heavily on some of the animation VFX side, which, if you look at the advancements of AI, have been encroaching more in that area. Do you not think even like VFX and stuff like that has been impacted yet?
No. Well, okay. When we talk about how AI might be disrupting, jobs or roles and things like this, we have to zoom out and look at all technology, and every technology that humans have ever created has been to replace tasks or do certain tasks. Again, going back into early days, the mechanization of agriculture, things that can pick the corn, machines that can pick the corn, and so people don't have to. You can look at earth movers, these big machines that can move a big giant earth so we don't have to use little shovels. I mean, you can go into all these details, and then even, moving to today, how many times are we trying to automate processes? What does automation mean? I mean, it's not a bad word, automation. Yeah. So we're always trying to build software that automates manual, repetitive, time-consuming, error-prone tasks so we as humans, and this is true for all technology, so we as humans can focus on the things that we either are better at doing or want to be doing. And AI is fundamentally no different. AI will replace certain tasks or augment or fuel certain tasks, but and it might replace certain tasks, uh, but it will free up time for humans to be doing things that humans are better at or want to be doing, such as the creative tasks. So AI can augment and help create, really fuel creativity, especially on the concept stage, but it's not replacing human creativity. And that's one thing that I think is a very important message. I have such admiration for the creative communities out there. I have a gene of creativity, but I'm not a creative. Uh, but I have so much admiration. And it's important for really for us to be looking at this in the right way. It is there to help us do the things that we should be doing, more essentially.
And I think it's a great point too when you even just think about the transition when the industry went. I mean, there's been plenty of those people when they went from no sound to talkies, and all of a sudden some people who didn't have the voice for it were out. That was the nature of just some of the changes in the industry then. But if we zoom even closer to where we are today, and you look at just the transformation from film into digital. I say closer, other people are like, what, that was a thing? But like I remember that, and I remember a friend of ours or mentor of ours, however we want to say it, with Leon mentioning, he had that job to fire one of the last negative cutters. Of course, then we rehired him in a digital fashion, and he had a new job there and excelled.
Great example.
That's it. Yeah, it's just I think the nature of the job change, as long as people are willing to look at where it's at, and I do think there's this key future of AI as that assistant, but back to your thing, so that it can unlock and let you do more of the creative things, hopefully. Now, whether it goes further is that big question, as algorithms and stuff, but they've been playing with that for years too, trying to create things like movie trailers and that. What's likely, probably, I think, and this is what I believe you're also saying, but I want to confirm, maybe they can get 80% there on something, but it's usually once somebody else has said, here's the concept, here's what I want to do, really refine that concept, got it 80% there, and then took it to the next 20% by itself.
And that 20% is the most important part. And that is the key point that we have to make here. And by the way, with VFX, everybody's been up in arms around VFX. I had the great pleasure, and when I say up in arms, I mean people have been super worried that these tools are going to replace the VFX industry, and everyone wants to point to this technology that we're building to help us as being some sort of a demon, and it's just not. And I had the great pleasure of moderating a panel for CES. It was at Digital Hollywood at CES just last month. Yep. And on my panel was a prolific VFX leader, producer, Ed Ulbrich, who recently was worked on the Robert Zemeckis movie Here, where they changed Tom Hanks and Robin Wright to look from 18 years old to 80 years old. And he is now one of the heads of Metaphysic, which is an one way to put it is an applied deep fake technology.
Sure.
But it's meant for filmmakers. And extraordinary, by the way. You should watch that movie. It's amazing.
I did.
Great.
Zemeckis made an experimental movie, which is pretty crazy if you think about it.
It is crazy. But the key point that Ed said was, when I first saw this technology, I was worried. And he said, and I thought, this is what we used to spend days and weeks, and now it's happening real time. They had cameras capturing Tom Hanks, and in real time on their monitor, he was de-aged. And he said, oh man, I mean, that's real time. Fast forward to the end of his experience, he's saying they can't hire fast enough, and they need more they have more roles open than they know what to do with, and that some of the best people that they're hiring for these new roles are some of the people that he's worked with for all these years. And this is a guy that's, Benjamin Button back, almost 20 years ago. And if you look at his resume, work on so many of the biggest effects movies Hollywood's ever made, and he can't hire fast enough. And a lot of the people he's hiring are the people he's been working for a long time, and that implies that these are the people that have decided to continue to lean into the future, lean into these tools, but they're just doing different things, and that's no different from the whole history of Hollywood, just continuing to lean into technology, and we find kind of a different role and different things to do, and new jobs and new content and new revenues. It just expands us. It doesn't take away. And I guess the last little thing I want to say on that note is every step along the way, there was first fear, sometimes panic, but it all ended up to expanding our industry. And I say the same thing about this chapter.
I have a question, Seth. So, when you look at the headlines right now, or recently, you see kind of Meta saying, due to AI efficiencies, we're reducing workforce. You hear, a lot of white collar jobs, at least predicted to be reduced, which Hollywood has a lot of white collar jobs in the middle of the creative production and distribution. Do you see those jobs impacted? And as a result, will it, in aggregate, take less people to produce content and distribute it faster than how it was done traditionally?
And can you give me an example in our industry of what you're talking about when you say white collar jobs?
I mean, anybody kind of in the middle of in the middle.
Yeah.
It could be marketing, legal,
so
oral jobs. Yeah.
Well, let me answer this way. Let's stop saying jobs. Let's look at tasks versus jobs. So tasks will get replaced. And if you're somebody that does all you do are tasks that are going to get replaced, and you don't want to learn new tasks, you might have some trouble in the future. But the truth is most aren't like that. And there are so many people in our industry that have been through all of these shifts, and what they did 20 years ago, sometimes even 10 years ago, those tasks are no longer needed, and they're doing a whole bunch of other things. So I think that we need to think about it in that way, and that'll really answer the whole question. You're not going to get replaced by AI. You're going to get replaced by somebody who's using it. And that's true for every technology. Again, I like to make dumb examples like the first online spreadsheets. I'm old enough to remember time before, Lotus 123 or whatever that was before Excel. We had our accountant had a big ledger, and he'd unfold it and he'd use pencil and he would write. I mean, literally, that's how it was in like the early 90s. And then, so imagine a bookkeeper that decided, nah, I'm not going to use a spreadsheet. I'm not going to use these programs. I like my pencil. I mean, how far is that one going to go? Right. Of course, that seems ridiculous, but there were people like that, by the way, back in those days.
And by the way, there were people like that, whatever you want to call it, in all of our days too, in their different fields, and that just hold on to whatever it was they're doing. Again, I say negative Ketting in this sort of way. There are some filmmakers out there who still shoot on film. They didn't let go of that because of their role that they could. And sometimes you can get people who hold on to that, and then you need the experts on that. But at the same time, you also then had the people who are like, no, this is my job as I go and I cut these as an editor, and now your job's at risk. No, there are assistant editors who now do all of that in the digital world. And maybe in this future, AI will come in and do a piece of that. But I do think, easy to take it back to the old roles that Art and I had when we were into DVD, call it first, actually go before that. And obviously, Seth, you were on an end of all this too. There were VHSs. Oh, okay, which by the way came out and wasn't even a product then. Nobody thought about selling their stuff, and home video boomed and made billions. And I think that's the other thing that people forget here is there are these new things that evolve out of this. Sometimes because of the time people have in their jobs, we're like, what if we do this, and how they could expand themselves out. But from there, it's like, okay, VHS, then came DVD. Well, then came Blu-ray, then came digital. Like there were these continued evolutions. Then came streaming, you could argue and say in that case, which as a whole nother thing. But what happened along the ways is we always strove to take our teams, automate as much as we could so that we could pivot into the next thing. And that's the ways that I think they look at it, back to your automation things. And I think that's how people will look heavily at AI as well. How can you just now use that so that we can start doing all these things we wanted to do that we haven't been able to do as a company that we know could be better for it? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean
Yeah.
that people, just like with Meta right now, won't come out and say we're reducing workforce because of this.
Yeah.
But let's be frank. Meta is also just putting in more stringent, like, we're only going to keep the best. And look, that's ways that some companies, Netflix, others, look at how they do their hiring and firing. And they just have this bar that's set differently than others, which we won't get into the government side of things, as that's happening right now too. But it's a big piece of that. Elon, I want to say proved, I don't know enough to say if he proved it or if it's actually been detrimental, but when he went into X, he cut so many of the people. It wasn't because of necessarily the technologies as much as it was resetting priorities and making sure that staff was held to the certain level. So anyway, I'm on a tangent now, but I do agree. I think it's still how people look at all these things, and AI is just one more tool that they're likely going to use to help them.
Yeah, completely. And another example, because sometimes I say, listen, as an artist, if you're a writer, you could be an illustrator, whatever creative you're doing. I mean, there's sort of a concept phase. I mean, even colorists, sitting with a DP or a director, and they're trying to apply color to a project. There's this concept phase where they're trying to set the specific look, or a writer's trying to come up with ideas for a story. Whatever it is, there's this concept phase. And one I like to use is wardrobe, right? So if you take any feature film, for example, where wardrobe becomes a really essential part. It's in every film, but
Sure.
think about something that's a period piece or something like that. I like to use Poor Things as a great example, because that was sort of a period piece, but also kind of fantasy, right? It was kind of like Victorian steampunk kind of stuff, where everything was larger than life. They have whoever that is, I imagine they put together some sort of a lookbook. They went online. They looked at all these images to get inspired. They did Google searches, Victorian, steampunk. They started to come up with these ideas. They copy and pasted into these lookbooks. And then eventually they made these things their own. But they had to have some reference. They had to get some inspiration. Every creative person is inspired by something or someone else's work. But imagine 10 years ago, we went to somebody who works in wardrobe for some film or studio.
Yeah.
And we said, imagine that you didn't have to drag and drop and do Google searches. You could just talk to your computer and say, give me some ideas. I want to explain to you kind of what I'm looking for. And I need 20 examples of this thing. And within a few seconds of talking to your computer, you had 20 examples. That would be, embraced like nothing else, except fast forward to today, the notion of letting that automation happen frightens people, which is kind of insane, because the concept phase can be really time consuming. It's super important. And I think some creatives really love that stage, but you can get stuck. And most creative people that I've spoken to would love nothing more than to accelerate that concept phase so they can get into the real creative phase and, in fact, have more time, because sometimes you're looking at that blank canvas, so to speak, and you're stuck. And so now we have technology that can help creatives with that concept phase and get more quickly to the creating. And I just find that fascinating.
Well, then where do you think more of this fear does come from then? Because if you're talking to some creative, and creatives seem more like, on board with like what it can unlock in that sort of way for them. And I could say the same when you look at creators in the smaller sense of like YouTube and other, things like that. Well, then is it the workers in the middle who are more worried, or is it still a level of some creatives?
You know what the answer is? It's anyone who hasn't used these tools is more worried.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah. So true. It's the fear of the unknown. Yeah.
I can tell you from experience that every creative that I have tasked with using these tools sees these tools in a completely different way. And almost every time I'm talking to someone, anyone, creative or otherwise, who's afraid of these tools, it is absolutely true. They have not really used them. They might have looked at them. They saw someone else using it. They read about it. They saw a video on it, but they didn't use it. They didn't try to incorporate this into their workflows. And on every occasion, there is not one exception to this, when somebody has tried to incorporate that, they see it in a whole light. They say, this thing's actually not really good. And I'm like, exactly.
Well, yeah.
Because they are a better creator. One
Yes.
thing, one little final point I want to make on that is generative AI is not creating anything. It's recreating.
Mhm.
And it does a great job at recreating, but it is trained on already created stuff.
Yeah.
And I believe in this intangible component to human imagination driven by real human experience. It comes from an inspired place that we don't understand, and that is real creativity, and that's uniquely human.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to look at it. I do think that it's the things people fear, because I even remember for a while there at Netflix, people be like, Netflix uses an algorithm to choose what they're going to make and produce, and it's all up to that. It's like, well, look, what it is they're just helping something to chew that stuff up faster and help look at trends and things like that, because, well, we are in the business of trying to give people, some of what they like, while at the same time there is always that balance people have to do. And this, you keep seeing this all the time in Hollywood, because they are chasing sometimes the latest trend, which is exactly what AI might try to do too. But in the end, what it matters is for those creators who could start saying, no, we're doing this. We're doing this, differently here. But I think it's interesting when you look at that, because I think humans, just like the AI, can do that. And there's this series I loved in the past. It's called Everything is a Remix. And they went through everything from music to, I forget what the series is. I'll have to link it below this for people.
Yeah,
to
we do
check
that
out.
as humans all the time.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and the reason why is because we're inspired by other things. I mean, there isn't a single musician that it wasn't inspired by some other artist's music, and
Yes.
and maybe it's they have 20 favorite bands or artists that they listen to, and their music is got inspiration from those, but of course it's theirs, it's their own.
Yes.
But they've all been inspired, and I guess what I'm saying is that's exactly the point, that these AI models can, in a sense, inspire our own creativity in a unique way, I think. And that's it. Yeah.
Although I did just have a flash forward, and you and I were sitting in pods somewhere, being used for our bio energy as AI took over the world. So let's let's hope that's not it. That was Matrix there for you. But okay, so Seth, I'm curious if we go just a little bit further down this pathway. Yeah. So, like, where we said with. Well, actually, I have so much I want to ask you, but let me just start here. Where do you see AI having the greatest impact?
Thank you. Let's get to that. Let's get to that point, because that was your question from 10 minutes ago. So let me answer this way. So first of all, AI has these tools, and there's so many of them now, dozens or hundreds of tools now, that will help democratize the process for filmmakers to be able to create compelling, professional looking visual stories, better, cheaper, faster, and so there is this sort of almost nascent group of a next generation of storytellers that have been unlocked to tell compelling stories. And again, they're not going to be very good if the human storyteller isn't really good and hasn't fine-tuned their tools to tell a story. It's going to, at the end of the day, it's going to could look pretty and look cool, but the storytelling, the human storytelling component is still absolutely essential. And that is uniquely human, not machine. But if you take any natural born storyteller who really can tell a good human story, now they have tools to be able to get that visual story that's in their head, which is the whole point from the beginning of cinema, is to get that visual story that's in a filmmaker's head onto a screen that everyone else can now watch, so you can share those stories, which is fundamental to human experience. Now they can do it better, cheaper, faster. Now, the problem is they're not enabled to distribute those stories in a meaningful way. They're still shackled by the current distribution, fan engagement, and monetization technology. So I think we know they've been unlocked and unleashed with some of these AI tools, and to create these stories, which they'll continue to be. But I think AI and other advancing technologies such as blockchain and others are going to enable new distribution platforms so that these filmmakers can more directly engage with their fans, find out of the billions of people on the planet, the people who resonate with these stories, and then have more control of monetizing themselves so that they can make a living telling and selling these stories. And I do think that the traditional distribution, the traditional Hollywood structure still has obviously a meaningful role. This doesn't displace. I'm just saying I think there's a world where this about to explode next generation of independent filmmakers and storytellers is going to be unlocked and unleashed in a really meaningful way with some of these advanced technologies.
So basically, more creators on YouTube, just doing better.
I think here's how I liked, and again, imagine ourselves like, I don't know, before YouTube and before Netflix, trying to describe to ourselves something that hasn't happened, like a YouTube or a Netflix. So there's something right now that's hard for us to describe. It's not going to be YouTube. It's not going to be Netflix. Something entirely different that is being conceived of right now by some founder somewhere, some young, next gen Reed Hastings is coming up with that next idea right now, and it's going to be entirely different. But the best way for our feeble 2025 minds to describe it would be something in between a YouTube channel and Netflix.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's a good point. And there is also some of these other technologies that we've been talking about for years that the technology hasn't fully supported, such as VR and AR. So I also think it'll be interesting to see where things like that go. I mean, Ready Player One is one of those that made my mind finally understand what a future world could look like, where we are living somewhat in a virtual versus this world here. And we'll see what happens. That might not be it, but it is another view of it.
I still haven't seen that movie. I got to remind myself to see that.
You got to watch it. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's just a great way to kind of look at that, because why wouldn't we? I mean, you look at people today, how much we want to escape, and that's what this other entertainment is, but you can escape into more of this virtual world.
Totally.
What does that look like? And what does that do?
Yeah. And there's virtual where you have the headsets on, and augmented where you have glasses on, but there's also live immersive. So Sphere, but think of it in smaller venues that are more local. I think there's a world where, not as many as there are Starbucks, but, in several locations around all the cities, we're going to have these, Cosm is something that opened up down here. I haven't been. I need to get out there, but where you can eat and drink and watch a game, but it's all around you, and you're still with other people. And so I think that's an exploding.
I can't wait to experience that.
Yeah,
it's on my list.
Maybe we should go together. Let's all.
Yeah, we should. It just feels like next level experience for a sporting event. That could be as good as being at the stadium.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Now I'm jealous being so far away, but yeah, you guys will have to tell me how that goes. I think with that too, there are probably some other areas when we think about media at large. I say probably. There are loads of areas, but one of the things that I remember we were exploring again over 10 years ago, it might have been 15 years ago, which was this concept of, well, how do you take stuff like in movies and TV shows and others where you could put in that box of cereal on the table, or any other ways that you could bring in advertising? And I think that's another thing that just never fully take off because the technology wasn't there. It was too expensive. But when you think about that today, nothing stops somebody from going back and looking at this, media library and monetizing it in this sort of way, because you could drop in, these advertisements and other things in a subtle way, but that literally somebody is paying today for some of that ad placement. What other things do you think about when it comes to AI enabling, and especially maybe, I know you said blockchain for distribution, but are there any other things that pop into your mind that you think are big opportunities?
So I think that we kind of touched on it earlier. I think better recommendation engines and algorithms that aggregate all of the long form content in more meaningful ways. I think that's really important in order to drive monetization on traditional long form content.
Yeah.
That user experience just needs to be better. Period. I mean, we're not making the business any money by looking, spending 45 minutes trying to figure out what we want to watch when the easy thing to do is just turn on YouTube, which, by the way, I'm guilty of. I get fed up and I just put on
Yeah.
YouTube and I just start watching stuff. That it bothers me that I do that, and I shouldn't have to. I should be served something that I know I'm gonna love, just like YouTube does for me. YouTube does that for me. How come our
So true.
traditional long form content? We have the technology. How come we're not using it? That's one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's so true. It's such a great way to look at it as you now make that comparison to what you were saying before, because yeah, that's absolutely it, and that's why we stay, whether it's scrolling on Instagram, whether it's on YouTube, whatever it might look like. That's a really great point. And even for me, I enjoy the stuff like that. I'm gonna also learn from. It's the same with my books all the time in the past when I'd read. It's like the nonfiction stuff like that. Well, again, that's why I love YouTube, and they're just so good at keep on feeding me that stuff that I just stay hooked on there forever and ever. Let me ask another, again, adjacent industry. What about when you look at gaming? What does all this mean for gaming?
I think more of the same. I think there's already we're seeing technologies that enable independent game developers to not only create these games that are compelling, but also reach players for these games, in a pretty large scale way. And I think we'll see, more of that for sure. I think we'll also start to see more. We've talked about this for a long time, and Hollywood and gaming have tried to come together in meaningful ways, both on the front end with IP, but also on the back end with technology such as previs and things like this. I think we are also going to see kind of mixed content kind of experiences, more experiments with that. Whereas is it a game? Is it a show? Choose your own adventure thing. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. Again, our 2025 minds can't really describe it well, but I think we're going to see new breeds of experiences that are super compelling for sure.
It's a good point there too, because I wonder if in traditional cinema, if you want to call it that, we still think about it in terms of watching the cinema on the big screen and that's what that experience is today. But I know in the past people experiment with these pods and other things in different ways that you could do it. But I am wondering whether or not we will have to choose your own adventure for these movies. So if somebody, depending on what they are, your sentiment thing again, maybe is going to be like, what, this person really needs that happy ending, not the sad ending.
I like to debate that because storytelling is storytelling. And the reason I say that is storytelling has been an essential core part of human experience since the very beginning of civilization. Cave paintings were the first visual stories that primitive man shared. And it's never been a choose your own adventure kind of a situation. It's I have a story to tell. I'm going to tell you this story and you're going to love it. Or maybe you don't love it because you don't like how I tell stories. But the point is, it's storytelling. And either you're a teller or you're a creator. I do think it's kind of really set that way. That being said, we like adventures. We like doing video games. We like these big, vast, worlds where
something
you
designed
can
specifically for that.
Yeah. And to mix those two, I think it's hard for us to get our head around that. I guess my point is this. I think there's always going to be a place for the storytelling and the story listening, or experiencing, and that it's black and white in that way. But I also think there are going to be new sort of immersive interactive experiences where you can play a role, something that's like a game. I mean, really, the cinematic kind of choose your own adventure story are games right now. I mean, right?
That's a great point.
I mean, that's what they are.
Yeah, great point. So Seth, right now, for any entrepreneurs who are listening to this and trying to think to themselves, oh man, where's that next big opportunity? What advice would you have for them?
It's a great question. I do think, first of all, the entrepreneur is a very specific archetype. It's kind of like you have it in you or you don't. We've all seen those folks. And right now there are so many brilliant, visionary startup founders that are imagining the next level, the next generation of media and entertainment. And I like to do whatever I can to kind of support them. One thing is that for founders who are not currently working inside of media and entertainment, I think it's important to connect with that community, really understand partly from whence we came, what the workflows are, and some of the nuances, so that things, because you're creating products, so a lot of
Yeah.
things that are lost on founders that have not been in our industry, including people in our industry, they forget you're creating a product. You're not creating art. You create art all you want at home, but don't expect that you're going to be able to earn a living from that.
Yeah.
If you want to earn a living from it and you're a serious professional, you're creating a product. And so when you're building technology that might enable storytellers, think about it. You're enabling storytellers that are creative, but that they're building products. So I think that's one really key point. I could probably list a bunch more, but that's one top of my head.
And you mentioned something else there, not to try to flood you or anything with people trying to reach out, but you said for them to connect with people in the industry, make sure it's there. If there's anybody right now who's like, I'd really love to connect with Seth, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yep, you can find me on LinkedIn. As far as I know, I'm the only Seth Hallen on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm pretty active there. Or my email address is seth@hallstone.vc.
Awesome. And with that, and on LinkedIn too, we'll also make sure that we link below to kind of the series you did that looked at and really dove into this topic a little bit here. I think it's a 4 or 5 point series.
Yeah, 4-part. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Which I've read and is great. And I think it's healthy for anybody to look at, because I think anybody who's also listening to this, who's in the industry, who's been a little bit fearful, dive in. I think is the big message here. Just start hugging it and it won't be as scary.
Thank you very much, Michael Artin. This was a blast. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, check out this one from Jonathan Mast, where he talks about how AI will change your daily life.